Resken, former Prophet of Clarity. Personal log, number 607. 75th cycle, 343 units. Another age as yet unnamed. For many cycles, I have lived on this magnificent shield world of the Forerunners. This refuge of the Usan people, learning and studying the vast treasure trove of ancient relics alongside the noble Sangheli colonists who have lived here for so long, and I have relished each and every moment of it. With each new discovery, I feel ever more connected to my ancestor, Meken Skre Aben, as I stroll through this final work of the Great Ones. It is as if I can feel his spirit guiding me even now as I find new wonders to study. And yet, in all my time within this place, I have forgotten the roots of which I was born to. My roots as a historian within the Covenant. As much as I despise what my people had done in recent events, the war against humanity, the great betrayal of the Sangheli, the madness and barbarity of the Great Schism, along with what's transpiring now in the aftermath. Within my very being is the seed of centuries of historians. The deep desire for truth and knowledge to make an accounting of the San Shyuum's doings in the galaxy is in my blood, my soul. And as I may very well be the last scion of my species, I feel a sense of duty and obligation to make a record of the entire history of the Covenant of which my kind had forged eons ago. This time, with clearer and open eyes, so that whoever sees this record may judge us fairly, and accordingly, helped along with the lost knowledge within my ancestral records which I managed to recover before fleeing High Charity as it fell. If my race is to end with me, so be it. But I make this for whoever cares to listen, be they San Shyuum, Sangheli, or even human, if only to shed light on what led us to such depravity. Now, where to begin? I suppose the origins of our Covenant can be traced back to a pivotal war that took place thousands of solar cycles ago on the planet Janjar Quom, the sacred home and womb of the San Shyuum, a world rich in powerful, inexplicable relics. 1,000,000 solar cycles and more of San Shyuum history took place here. This was where the San Shyuum emerged from the seas, where they began to farm, to build, to create civilization, where they shed their blood as they struggled with one another over sovereignty. It was on this world that the ancient San Shyuum developed a faith of their own, positing those who made the many relics found there were gods. Those we came to learn were called the Forerunners. Our ancestors believed this ancient race achieved divinity through the activation of Halo, a series of ring-like machines that would come to be known as the Sacred Rings, and those who would faithfully follow in their footsteps would become gods themselves. This belief would come to be known as the Path of the Great Journey. The most resplendent of these relics was the majestic Dreadnought, a massive Forerunner ship lying at the center of the Great Apophthia Sea. It was a dispute over this vessel that tore the San Shyuum people apart. Some believed they should explore the key ship and bask in its knowledge and majesty, while others barred their way with the warning, "Dare not defile this sacred and holy temple, lest risk the wrath of the gods." The controversy that followed led to a fierce division. The traditionalist Stoics proclaimed that the artifacts of the Forerunner should only be deferentially observed, while the open-minded reformists refuted this, stating that these objects had been left behind as gifts to be used, explored, and even dismantled if deemed necessary. Their conflict began entirely as a political and philosophical dispute, but quickly devolved when the Stoics' numbers began to erode, forcing its leaders to violently suppress the reformists through both imprisonment and death. It was then that the War of Wills would begin, a bloody century-long conflict that culminated in 1,000 heavily armed reformists secretly infiltrating the Dreadnought before barricading themselves inside. With the Stoics' unwillingness to damage the vessel to quell this heinous act, the battle quickly turned into a protracted siege. To the Stoics' shock and dread, the reformists eventually managed to activate the dreadnought, taking a god's fistful of the world as the mountain-high vessel rose to meet the stars. My ancestors were on that reformist flock. It had the honor and privilege to join their brothers and sisters in this glorious exodus. They tell us that after fleeing Janjer Quom, they stumbled upon ancient orbital installations around Salisar Quom, a sister world in our system. Here they found not only provisions to sustain themselves, but artificial creatures called Huragok, servant tools created by the gods to repair the holiest of their relics, and a powerful cartographer, a map that guided the worthy along the path. When this machine fed navigational data into the dreadnought, it activated an onboard device known as a luminary, a divine instrument that could guide the vessel to worlds rife with Forerunner relics. Eventually, the reformists gathered many of these Huragok aboard the dreadnought and followed the luminary's signal away from their star system and into the great beyond. For hundreds of cycles, the Shyuum aboard the dreadnought traveled across the stars, discovering vast Forerunner reliquaries on long-abandoned worlds and in derelict installations. Not only were they enriched by the Huragok's unfolding of their maker's secrets, but this further crystallized their beliefs in the gods themselves. But in those days, there were so few Shyuum, at least in space, and there was a tendency to genetic blight among them. For this reason, a roll of celibates was created, a list designating those who were not approved to mate and reproduce offspring. It was instrumental in preventing inbreeding and degeneracy from arising among our people and continued for thousands of cycles. But this enlightened passivity was not to last. Many cycles later, the Shyuum came upon Olgathon, a hardscrabble world that appeared to be entirely uninhabited. After making landfall, the first reformist pioneer detachment targeted a repository of Forerunner relics. Upon their arrival, however, they discovered that the site was inhabited by war-mad species known as the Sangheli. Originally from Sanghelios, the Sangheli hailed from a world that was also rich with Forerunner artifacts, also revering the Forerunners as gods. Having long ago spread out among the stars, they spent generations carefully observing and protecting the sacred relics, holding that physical manipulation of such technology was blasphemy of the highest order, punishable by death. The first encounter was amenable, if not tense, but after the Sangheli had discovered the Shyuum's true intentions, they were horrified to learn that our people used the relics of the Forerunners for our own ends. We tried consolating them, sending a delegation that explained the Shyuum under the direction of their prophets, known at the time as the Keepers of the Dawn, also worshipped the Forerunners, but to no avail, for the Sangheli shared a similar spiritual ultimatum as our stoic enemies of old: defile holy relics and pay with your lives. The delegates were butchered, summarily slaughtered by the Sangheli, under the lordship of a fearsome arbiter judge king, Vema to God. All-out war began that day, a bitter and devastating conflict that would bring both species to the brink of extinction, a conflict known to history as the War of Beginnings. And so the former age had come to an end, and the first age of conflict had begun. The Shyuum quickly took the dreadnought into the skies, only to be met by a blockade of Sangheli warships. The fleet engaged the dreadnought relentlessly, but the ship's resilience proved matchless and the Sangheli were summarily defeated. Though the Shyuum were unwilling to land again, they showed their resolve by violently razing the planet and eradicating its Sangheli population. The war spread across the Sangheli worlds in cycles that followed, bringing untold devastation as the Shyuum sought to obliterate whatever remained of their new enemy, and the Sangheli resolutely fought back, even once managing to infiltrate the dreadnought's interior, massacring thousands in their wake and damaging several critical systems. This event began to shift the opinion of the Shyuum within the dreadnought. Although their tyrannical leader, Ekla Magal Sadao, known as Pervading Stone, demanded more Sangheli blood, other leaders such as the wise Saparetta Makra, also known to history as Breaking Shadow, backed by noble Ushering Dusk, opposed this, instead desiring a truce. The first Kaidan of Sanghelios, Milat Orlam, also sought change when he proposed that the Sangheli respectfully use their own Forerunner artifacts, many which they knew already to be powerful weapons. While this was resisted for a time, even leading to the assassinations of the first Kaidan himself, the Sangheli eventually gave in, recognizing the peril of continuing against the Shyuum as they had. Under the bold wisdom of Orlam's son, Pelisar, they began employing their own Forerunner weapons to great effect. While this softened most Shyuum toward the possibility of a ceasefire, the uncompromising pervading stone grew only more incensed. Seeking to obliterate the Sangheli entirely, he finally brought the dreadnought to Sanghelios, ravaging their homeworld and its moons as a final penance, I suppose for his father who perished long ago on Olgathon at the onset of the war. In response, the Sangheli unleashed their newfound weapons, eventually bringing the dreadnought down on the blood moon of Subban and holding it in place with gravity anchors. The Sangheli long debated whether to simply destroy the ship outright or to breach it for their own taking. In the end, Breaking Shadow led a swift and violent coup within the dreadnought, assassinating Pervading Stone, who had refused peace for so many cycles. With newfound solidarity among his people, Shadow then prepared to at last broach the possibility of peace with the Sangheli. After many cycles of bloody war, the Shyuum sent an unarmed delegation who recounted all that had transpired throughout the conflict. After which, Breaking Shadow and Pelisar the Strident, the new first Kaidan, forged a tenuous truce, forgiving each other of their crimes and working toward a peace for both their peoples. This effort was formalized with the Writ of Union, a sacred document of covenant between both species and ultimately recognition of their sole and central focus, worshipping the Forerunners through the discovery and reverent exploration of their profound, luminous artifacts. This was the birth of the Covenant, an agreement founded on the belief that despite our blood-soaked history and significant differences, both Shyuum and Sangheli could work together to pursue transcendence into divinity, their shared quest of the sacred rings. The Writ of Union required both species to lay down their arms and unite. The Shyuum forsook their mighty dreadnought, and the Sangheli would henceforth govern all military affairs, while the Shyuum provided overarching religious insight and purpose, under the authority of a triumvirate of hierarchs to usher in the dawn of each age of Covenant history, and shepherd the faithful along the path of divine transcendence. Despite these efforts, however, not all Sangheli desired to join our Covenant. As reported in the secret writings of my ancestor, the Prophet of Inner Conviction, there was a short-lived rebellion and a violent purging that immediately followed, an event we would simply call the Rending. That a certain Sangheli faction, led by one Usa Zealous, tried to foment a resistance to the Writ, and ultimately the Covenant. He and his followers were said to have been annihilated by a mighty and blasphemous act of mass suicide. Their deliberate destruction of the planetoid they called the Refuge, a shield world constructed by the Great Ones. In truth, this was but a clever ruse on Usa's part, for within this great shield world was a tool no other before it had possessed, a disassembly process that feigned destruction, and thus his adherents, known today as the Usans, were allowed to live in peace on this magnificent world that they fractured in many pieces and had only recently joined together once more. A broken circle made whole.